if you're talking presbyopia, so the loss of near flexibility as we get into our fourth and fifth decade and beyond, we'd like to joke it's, you have too many anniversaries of your 39th birthday and the whole long arm sort of syndrome. And that's actually, just the loss of flexibility. And that can be seen as almost a black and white opposite of myopia in that it is blurry here and it's difficult to see and you preserve distance vision. Whereas the hyperopic version of long sight, it's not that necessarily someone can't see up close, but it's a lot of effort. And effort can be exposed in lots of different ways. So it might be eye strain, might be headaches, might be sore eyes, might be a loss in concentration. And in the research, there's an association between high degrees of hyperopia in children and reduced rates of literacy. And so they still haven't done enough to really kind of tease out what that actually means. But simplistic level, if you're having to work to keep the world in focus, then there's less concentration left over to process what you're looking at. And certainly when you pick up someone who might have an excessive amount of hyperopia when they're young, the research indicates that if you do a partial prescription of that, some of the processing can improve as a way of reducing the risk of those processing issues influencing academia later on. And then at an extreme level, then that's the really high amounts of hyperopia where you start to get into a high prevalence of strabismus or eye turns and amblyopia or lazy eye. And again, because it's not necessarily a blur issue, it can be more sort of subtle signs that are picked it up, but that need to be used to pick it up.
Right. So just to summarize what you're saying there, so the like presbyopia, the old folks problem is due to lack of flexibility in the lens in your eye, whereas
hardens up with age.
Hyperopia, on the other hand, is to do with like the elongation or lack of elongation of the eyeball itself. Like myopia, we know is probably because the eyeball's elongated too much, but hyperopia means it's maybe too short. Is that an accurate summary?
And if you look at the eyeball as an optical system, there's lots of components that make up what that optical system is. How curved is the front of the eye? How powerful is the lens? How long the eye is? And yes, in myopia, we know that the eye length is getting longer compared to how the other optics play into balance. And yes, hyperopic eyes tend to be smaller than average. And what I think we see is that there's a really broad range of refractive errors or status that infants have, so babies have, but they all move towards a small level of hyperopia as part of development. And when you end up with excessive hyperopia, for some reason, there are some kids who just don't go through that recalibration process and get kind of stuck at that sort of early higher hyperopia level. And again, we don't know why that happens. Sometimes there seems to be a bit of a family history element. I've certainly seen some families where there's no sign of it in the parents, but all 3 or 4 kids might demonstrate it. So that's not a given.
So most kids are born with some degree of hyperopia, but you're saying that they outgrow that as they develop. Is that right?
The average for human beings is to be hyperopic, a little bit long-sighted, and that range is kind of is sort of spread out when they're young, but then comes into a very narrow range. And so, that's what you want to see. So if you're picking it up in an infant, then you've got to consider a number of different factors as to whether it's a problem just yet. And the key part is just tracking it to see where it heads.
Right. And so you mentioned that glasses and getting a prescription is one way that parents can address that kind of situation before it becomes a problem with like academic performance and reading ability and that sort of thing. So glasses reading prescriptions are one of the potential solutions to that. Is that right?
Yeah, and we've got to be careful to say, look, it's not a cure for all of that sort of things. It's more, it decreases your chances of having that being an influence on how well you do at school and those sorts of things. It's not, there's so many factors that go into someone's ability to learn. Vision's just one of them, but vision being a dominant sense, it's important to make sure it's well supported long before you get to school.